If you want to invest your money today, you have a few standard options. You can buy shares of Apple or Tesla. You can gamble on crypto. You can put it in a 401k and wait until you're 65. But in 2009, in a small dusty fishing town on the coast of Somalia, there was another option. It was a stock exchange. But it didn't trade in technology or oil or real estate. It was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It had 72 listed companies, and every single one of those companies was a pirate crew. This wasn't a black market back alley deal. It was a formalized, bureaucratic financial institution. You could walk in, sign a piece of paper, and invest in a hijacking operation. And the returns? They beat Wall Street by a mile. Take Sarah Ibrahim. She was a 22-year-old divorced woman. She didn't have cash, she didn't have a bank account. But after her divorce, she had received a settlement from her ex-husband, a single rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG-7. So she went to the stock exchange and she invested her grenade into a crew that was planning to hunt for a Spanish fishing vessel. 38 days later, the crew returned. The ransom was paid, and for her single grenade, Sarah was paid out $75,000 in cash. This is the story of Harardere, the only place on earth where high finance met high seas hijacking. And it forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. What actually separates a criminal ring from a corporation? To understand how a pirate stock market even exists, you have to look past the Hollywood image of piracy. Forget the wooden legs and the buried treasure. In the late 2000s, Somali piracy wasn't chaos, it was an industry. And like any industry, it had a problem: overhead costs. Hijacking a massive cargo ship is expensive. You need speedboats, you need fuel, you need food for weeks at sea. And of course, you need AK-47s, ladders, and grappling hooks. Most young men in Harardere had the will, but they didn't have the capital. So the town improvised. They crowdsourced it. The Harardere Exchange allowed anyone in the community to become a stockholder. If you were a wealthy warlord, you could put up the cash for a new engine. If you were a local grandma, you could cook the meals for the crew and earn a fraction of a share. If you were Sada, you invested your weapon. It was, in a strange historical irony, almost identical to the Dutch East India Company of the 1600s. They were the first company to issue stocks to fund risky voyages to the Spice Island. The people of Harardere just reinvented it. And just like the Dutch East India Company, it worked. By 2010, Harardere had transformed. This wasn't a sleepy village anymore. It was a boom town. Journalists who visited described a surreal scene. Brand new luxury SUVs were stuck in traffic jams on dirt roads. The pirates were the celebrities. They were the venture capitalists. The stock exchange even funded local infrastructure. A percentage of every ransom was taxed by the exchange to pay for the local hospital and the public school. Crime hadn't just taken over the town, it was the town. It was the government, the employer, and the bank, all rolled into one. But to understand why a grandmother would invest in a violent crime, you have to understand what happened to the water. The narrative we usually hear is simple. These are bad men who wanted easy money. But the pirates of Harardere didn't start as pirates. They started as the Volunteer Coast Guard. In 1991, the Somali government collapsed. The Navy dissolved. And almost overnight, the country's massive coastline, the longest in Africa, was left unguarded. The world saw an opportunity. Commercial fishing fleets from Europe and Asia descended on Somali waters. They engaged in illegal, unregulated fishing, stealing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tuna and lobster every year. They rammed local fishing boats and cut their nets. But they did something worse, too. Companies used the unguarded ocean as a cheap garbage bin. They dumped toxic waste, heavy metals, even nuclear material off the coast. When the 2004 tsunami hit, barrels of this waste washed up on the shore. People in coastal villages started getting sick, rashes, radiation poisoning. The local fishermen were watching their food source be stolen and their homes be poisoned. So they took up arms. At first, they would speed toward the foreign trawlers and demand a tax for fishing in their waters. It was vigilante justice. But then they realized something. The tax paid better than the fishing ever did. The moral line blurred. The vigilantes became the aggressors. The Coast Guard became the cartel. And the stock exchange was born. For a few years, business was good. In 2011 alone, Somali piracy cost the global economy $7 billion. But financial bubbles always burst. And when you mess with global trade, the world hits back. The superpowers of the world, the US, China, Russia, the EU, rarely agree on anything, but they all agreed on this: the stock market had to close. International navies began patrolling the Gulf of Aden. Cargo ships started hiring private security contractors, ex-military snipers who would shoot on sight. The risks of the investment skyrocketed. Back in Harardere, the mood changed. The dividends stopped coming. Crews would go out and never come back, sunk by a Russian frigate, or arrested and thrown into prisons in countries they'd never heard of. Investors lost everything. The Sarah Ibrahims of the town didn't get their $75,000. They lost their grenades, their savings, and their sons. By 2013, the exchange was effectively dead. The luxury cars broke down and weren't replaced. The boomtown went bust. Today, the Pirate Stock Exchange is a ghost story, a strange economic experiment that proved that capitalism is efficient enough to function even in a failed state. It's easy to look at Harardere as a villainous anomaly, a place where greed overtook morality. But is it really that different from the systems we accept every day? We live in a world where legitimate companies profit from addiction, from conflict, from the destruction of the environment. We just have better lawyers. We have glass buildings instead of dusty courtyards. The people of Harardere were desperate. They were backed into a corner by a world that had stolen their fish and poisoned their shores. So they built a mirror of that world. They built a system that ruthlessly prioritized profit over human life. They didn't invent the game. They just learned how to play it. And for a brief moment, before the warships arrived, they were winning.